Great cities follow their own historical path. Often, their destinies diverge from those of the people who founded them. London has scant memory of the Romans. Budapest scarcely remembers the Celts who built its original settlement. The erstwhile capital of Christianity, Constantinople, has long since become the Islamic city of Istanbul. Great cities are treasures that are subject to the vagaries of history. They constantly evolve, yet they endure. They are not treasuries, but treasures, diamonds and pearls, dispersed around the world. One such tiny treasure is to be found on the Bulgarian Black Sea coast, Pomorie. In 33 CE, Jesus Christ revealed his divine mission to the world and chose his apostles. First among them was Andrew, a poor fisherman from the Galilee, whose brother was the future Saint Peter. This is why the Orthodox Church called him Saint Andrew the First Called. You are the salt of the earth, Jesus told his apostles, and sent them to the four corners of the world to preach the new faith to mankind. After the Lord's death and resurrection, St. Andrew headed north. By the middle of the 1st century, he had reached Anchalo, the present-day Bulgarian city of Pomorie. Anchalo goes back a long way. It was founded by the Thracians on the southwestern Black Sea coast, most likely in the course of the 5th century BCE. The Thracians, a collection of ancient tribes now long gone, inhabited virtually the entire Balkan Peninsula. Most modern cities in Bulgaria, Serbia, Romania, Macedonia, and even northern Greece were founded as Thracian settlements. The Thracians were skilled craftsmen and builders. Herodotus spoke of them in glowing terms, and Homer described one of their kings, Rhesos, and his magnificent steeds in the 10th song of the Iliad. They had no script of their own and most likely were subsumed by their neighbors, the Greeks. The last remnants were defeated by the Roman legions. They left behind numerous gold and silver hoards, impressive tombs, and other artifacts scattered around the peninsula. Their cities along the Black Sea coast were taken over by the Greeks. We could only guess what Anchialo looked like in the centuries before Christ. The city was abandoned after a natural cataclysm. Its remains are today below sea level, presumably submerged after a giant wave hit the shore, like a pearl hidden inside a shell. The original blueprint of a city will forever remain hidden in the depths. Their surviving citizens moved to a new, safer location. Ancialo became part of the hinterland of the fortified Greek colony of Apollonia Pontica, today the city of Sozopol. Ancient Greeks were successful in colonizing the Black Sea coast as well as the Mediterranean. Their settlements on the western side of the Black Sea were glittering examples of urban planning and architecture. Apollonia, Mesembria, Ancialo, Odessos. They all boasted magnificent public and private buildings. The legendary heroes of antiquity such as Jason, Hercules, and Theseus found safe haven here. For Jason and his company, Ancialo must have been the last friendly port on the way to discovering the Golden Fleece. The Argo would have stopped to stock up on provisions before sailing to Colchis on the eastern side of the Pontus Euxenos. In antiquity, the locals were mainly engaged in fishing and farming, traditional pursuits of an ancient seaside people. But the Black Sea is not rich in marine life, certainly not as much as the Mediterranean. Beneath a certain depth, it contains large amounts of hydrogen sulfide, a highly toxic gas that makes life impossible. The presence of this compound is due to a natural cataclysm that occurred 10,000 years ago. A massive earthquake brought down the land barrier that separated the lower freshwater lake that was the Black Sea from the higher saline Mediterranean. The Bosphorus Strait opened up and the rushing seawater destroyed all Black Sea flora and fauna. Biodiversity was slow to recover. The citizens of Ancialo, however, turned disadvantage into opportunity by supplementing their incomes from fishing with the production and trading of sea salt, a very prized commodity throughout history. Another considerable source of wealth was winemaking. The climate around the city is very conducive to growing vines, and the locals have a well-deserved reputation as master vintners. Shards of countless earthenware vessels for the keeping and transportation of wine litter the seafloor and turn up regularly whenever underwater archaeological expeditions comb the waters around the city. Ancialo prospered. St. Andrew the First Called turned up in the middle of the 1st century CE. He, whom Jesus had referred to as one of those who were the salt of the earth, met with the men who extracted salt for a living. Ancialo was rich in wine, which had a special significance in Christian ritual. At the Last Supper, the Lord passed a cup of wine to his adepts and told them, "Drink from it, all of you, for this is my blood of the New Testament. It is spilled for all, for the forgiveness of sins." So, at the first liturgy, Jesus gave the initial communion, and wine became a symbol of his blood. In Ancialo, St. Andrew founded a Christian community and repeated the Last Supper ritual. Earlier, he had visited Byzantium, the future Constantinople, and had ordained its first bishop, Statius. Today, the heirs of Statius bear the exalted title, Ecumenical Patriarch. After Anchialo, St. Andrew turned north. He was the first Christian missionary to set foot on what today is Russian territory, which led the Russian Orthodox Church to proclaim him her founder and celestial guardian. The first Russian chronicler, Nestor, wrote that 2,000 years ago, St. Andrew raised a cross on the spot where the city of Kiev stands today, and said, "Here divine benediction will spread, and churches of the Lord Jesus Christ will be built." True enough. At present, the Cathedral of St. Andrew the First called marks the location where he stood and spoke. The apostle wandered the entire Black Sea littoral and preached in Armenia and Georgia. Finally, he met with a martyr's death in Patras, present-day Greece. He was crucified, and the form of the cross, resembling the letter X, bears his name to this day. It was a fate shared by many Christians in the latter-day Roman Empire. Imperial Russia's highest order is the St. Andrew Cross. The decoration was revived after the end of communism. In Anchialo, St. Andrew founded one of the first Christian communities in the Balkans. But his feverish proselytism did not transform the city overnight. For long afterwards, Anchialo remained pagan. The famed Pomorie tomb bears testament to the enduring faith in the old gods. The tomb was built by Thracians in Roman times and is quite without parallel. It is not, strictly speaking, a tomb at all, for no burials were discovered in it. Archaeologists suspect it was more of a temple, a mausoleum. This hypothesis is supported by the very peculiar construction of the edifice. At its center rises a hollow column, which gracefully curves upwards to meld with the arches of the roof. The column is said to be an altar of sorts, a sacrificial space dedicated to the sun god. In daytime, the spot is generously lit, and at night, a fire was started in the hollow space to enable priests to interpret the will of the gods. Paganism was alive and well, but the seeds of the new faith were also vigorously growing and soon started to bear fruit. Near Anchialo, there is an ancient monastery named after St. George. Legend has it that the monks were heirs to the original community of Christians. But this claim is disproved by the archaeological record, according to which the first indications of a monastic settlement here dates to the 7th century CE. During the 15th century Ottoman conquest, the monastery was obliterated. Later, it was rebuilt by a local Islamic feudal lord, who subsequently converted to Christianity. In the courtyard, there is a water source that is said to heal the sick. According to legend, the water started flowing when the Turk ordered the spot to be excavated and a marble relief of St. George was discovered. The Turk was cured of his ailments, promptly converted, and became the first abbot of the revived cloister. A bell tower was built over the source, and the marble relief was cemented into it. The day of the patron saint, the 6th of May, is celebrated as the official holiday of the city to the present. In the vicinity of Anchialo is the field where one of the biggest and bloodiest battles of the early Middle Ages took place. The armies of the Bulgarian Tsar Simeon the Great and the Byzantine Emperor Constantine II Porphyrogenitus and his regent mother Zoe clashed here on August the 20th, 917. The massed armies were enormous. According to an Arab chronicler, over 120,000 soldiers took part in the engagement, which ended in a decisive Bulgarian victory. The Romans were decimated and mercilessly pursued. The battle ended in massacre. Merely 2,000 Roman troops survived and took refuge behind the walls of Anchialo. For years, the fields between the city and the Acheloi River were covered with thousands of decomposing bodies. Even today, more than 1,100 years later, arrowheads and other weapons debris can still be picked up by visitors. After the debacle, Zoe was removed from the regency. The defeat weakened Byzantium for decades, though the empire endured. It would finally succumb at the hands of the Ottomans 5 centuries later. Bulgaria was destroyed 60 years before the fall of Constantinople. Mehmet the Conqueror entered the city on May 29, 1453. Anchialo had fallen 2 months earlier. Unlike the capital city, however, it remained a Christian city. The Ottoman era was a curious episode in the history of medieval Anchialo. The initial Islamic onslaught paralyzed the political and economic life of the newly conquered Christian lands of the Balkans. Some enclaves remained relatively unscathed. Constantinople was Islamicized, as were many other important cities on the conqueror's path. The indigenous aristocracy was slaughtered or exiled. Christians lost their elites. The Sultan appointed the Constantinople Patriarch as their representative before the authorities. Anchialo was that rare thing, a Christian remnant in the hinterland of the capital. Its importance for the newly enslaved grew exponentially. It was like a hidden pearl. The choice of the city as a place of exile for one of Constantinople's patriarchs, Joseph I Koka, is indicative of its importance. 100 years after the fall of Constantinople, the Islamic expansion into Europe was stopped. Suleiman the Magnificent lost the battle for Vienna, and his son and heir, Selim II's fleet was destroyed at Lepanto. At this time, the Christians of the empire were well on their way to re-establishing themselves economically. Some were fantastically successful. One such man was Michael Cantacuzene. He was not related to the Byzantine imperial dynasty of the same name, but adopted it out of a desire to be recognized and respected. He amassed a huge fortune and settled in Anchialo. The ruling sultan allowed him to monopolize the salt trade. Michael built himself a magnificent palace at the cost of 20,000 gold ducats. the equivalent to 70 kilograms of pure gold, or €2 million in today's money. His annual income is said to have equaled 60,000 ducats. A true medieval magnate, Cantacuzene financed the rebuilding of the Ottoman fleet after the Lepanto debacle. He was known as Setenoglu, son of the devil. Michael's influence was enormous. He appointed and brought down Constantinople's patriarchs at will. One was the Ancialo native Jeremiah II. Jeremiah's place in the history books was ensured when he recognized the autocephaly of the Russian Orthodox Church. Setenoglu's stunning career ended abruptly when he was arrested, accused of high treason, and hanged on the gate of his own palace, which was then burned to the ground. Michael's enormous wealth quickly dissipated, as everything devilish is prone to do. The only enduring legacy of his influence is the presence of the Russian Patriarch in the hierarchy of the autocephalous Orthodox churches. He is fifth in line after the Patriarchs of Constantinople, Alexandria, Antioch, and Jerusalem. Ancialo's connection with the political history of Constantinople and Russia lasted into the following centuries. At the outset of the 20th century, the city was home to one of independent Bulgaria's most lyrical poets, Pejo Yavorov. He worked at the local post and telegraph office, but his true calling was artistic and revolutionary. Yavorov took part in the struggle for the liberation of Macedonia and wrote much admired verse and patriotic and social criticism. Yavorov took after the 19th century literary giants, who denounced the Ottoman atrocities against the Bulgarian people in 1876. Yavorov took a stand in defense of the Armenians, the first nation to adopt Christianity in 301 CE. A thousand years later, Armenia fell under the onslaught of the Muslim armies and in the final account, lost its independence. In 1894, the Ottoman government took up a series of measures aiming to reduce the Armenian population of the empire to a minimum. The Ottomans suspected the Armenians of disloyalty and collusion with the Russians. The most extreme of these measures was the extermination of 50,000 Armenians, the so-called First Pogrom. Saddened and angered, Yavorov wrote one of his tenderest poems dedicated to the martyred nation. The poets did not live to witness the second mass pogrom of 1915 to 1916, when the Ottomans subjected the Armenians to a true genocide. Over 1 million perished. Yavorov himself lost his life in 1914. The Armenian genocide sparked a series of bloody events that marked the first half of the 20th century. Yavorov sensed the approaching shadow. He perished tragically, but likely never forgot the happy times he spent by the Ancialo seaside. Today, his statue stands there in the midst of a beautiful park. The bloody start of the 20th century caught up with Uncialo. Macedonia, which remained part of the Ottoman Empire but was predominantly inhabited by Bulgarians and to a far lesser extent Greeks, was the scene of a violent ethnic conflict. The two communities set up paramilitary organizations and clashed repeatedly. After a number of Bulgarian villages in Macedonia fell victim to Greek violence, in 1906, the Uncialo Bulgarians expelled their Greek neighbors and burnt down their houses. The refugees found shelter in Greece, where they founded a new settlement, Nea Uncialos. Several decades later, a new wave of nationalistic-inspired ethnic cleansing resulted in a name change of the city itself. Since 1934, its name has been Pomorie. Modern Pomorie is the third largest Bulgarian seaside conurbation. It occupies the eponymous peninsula 10 kilometers north of the port city of Burgas. A major international airport is a mere 8 kilometers away. Pomorie's climate is mild, with short winters and long, warm, and sunny summers. Local currents ensure that the seawater is extremely clean. The city is surrounded by the sea on 3 sides: south, east, and southeast, with only the northern bordering on the Pomorie Lake. A major stopover on the Via Pontica avian migratory route. Over 260 species of birds transit or live permanently on the lake. For those inclined to see this symbolism, this natural wonder also had Christian connotations. As in traditional iconography, the Holy Ghost is depicted as a bird. Another symbol of early Christianity was the fish. The first 2 apostles, Andrew and Peter, were fishermen. In present-day Pomorie, fishing is more of a pastime than a serious profession. Nevertheless, the labor of the few remaining fishermen suffices in satisfying the ever-increasing demand. Tourists and locals alike can sample any number of seafood delicacies in the city's myriad restaurants. The ancient fishing tradition lives on in Pomorie. Pomorie hosts the only museum of salt in Eastern Europe. A bow to tradition, of course, as well as remembrance of those whom Christ referred to as the salt of the earth. The museum is devoted to the process of naturally evaporating seawater to make salt, the so-called Old Uncialo technique. The locals are respectful of tradition, since income from the production and sale of salt was so important to the city for millennia. The exhibition is out in the open. Visitors are invited to explore around 20,000 square meters of evaporation pools that are fully functioning to this day. They are separated by wooden dikes. The heat of the sun evaporates some of the water they enclose. Workers move the remainder to another pool, and thus, pool after pool, the water content decreases and the salt content increases until all that is left are pure white crystals. A separate exposition shows the specialized equipment required for the process in the past, wheelbarrows, rakes, etc., as well as films that explain the technology in detail. Sea salt production is nowadays more of a tourist attraction, but winemaking is a fully fledged industry. Fine enough for the most exacting palate. The area around Pomorie is famed for vines of many different sorts that produce excellent red and white vintages. The best Bulgarian brandy is made here too, and it would be no exaggeration to say that it successfully competes with the best Armenian and Georgian tipples. One could conceivably go as far to say, the best French cognac has nothing much on the brandy of Pomorie. Michael Cantacuzzi's palace has long since disappeared, to be replaced by a multitude of modern-day palaces in the form of luxury hotels. Every summer, thousands of tourists from around the world are drawn to Pomorie's pristine sandy beaches and crystal-clear waters. The city is a firm favorite in the holiday business, but this comes with a significant bonus: spa and health capacity. The brackish Pomorie Lake is a source of salty curative mud with excellent therapeutical potential. Leading health experts recommend mud baths for the orthopedic, cardiological, skin, and other ailments. Scientists consider Pomorie mud to have better healing qualities than that of the Dead Sea. In recent years, the city has become a major player in the balneological tourism stakes. Pomorie, Old Uncialo, has changed much since the days of St. Andrew the First called. The ancient city was subsumed by the medieval one. The medieval settlement gave way to the modern one. Buildings, streets, traditions, people's livelihoods are all different. But the spirit of the people is unconquerable and indomitable. Strong, open, the spirit of seamen, fishermen, winemakers, and traders. Honest, independent, hard-working. It is as though St. Andrew never left. Or more like, keeps coming back every day. Coming back to the hidden pearl of the Black Sea.